Well, this is a big get for the show here.
Well, I don't know about that.
I still call you Judge, right?
Well, it doesn't matter. Whatever you're comfortable with.
Really? Well, I'm not comfortable with Joyce.
Well, everybody's struggling with it these days. I
Really?
have friends, attorneys, everybody asking me, what do I call you?
Well, I think it's Judge.
Well, that's fine.
Right? Once a judge, always a judge.
If that works for you, but again, I will not be offended if you call me Joyce.
Well, that would be nice, but maybe we'll see how the interview goes first. And I was looking at these top flight researchers. You were on the bench for 21 years.
20 years.
20 years. 2024.
Yeah. I was elected in November of 2004, but I
okay.
took the bench January 1st, 2005.
Right. Always correcting me on my dates, but that's it doesn't seem like that long ago that you decided to put your hat in the ring and run, and 20 years goes by just like that.
Sure does.
And we were talking briefly about whether it's Judge or Joyce or Your Honor, and that sort of sticks with you. But you had a career before that. You were with the Ingham County Prosecutor, right, for a pretty significant time.
17 years.
17 years. And, before you were on the bench, I mean, you were tough, right?
Some might say.
Well, you won most of your cases.
I did. I wasn't tough the way some people think of a prosecutor. Like, I wasn't a bulldog.
I mean in the courtroom.
Yeah, but I was tough by being prepared and, knowing what I was doing. I wasn't tough, like beat up on people tough.
Well, I always think the toughest prosecutors are the ones that are reasonable.
I think so, too.
It's like, oh, my God, this is going to be tough because they're so they're making me an offer and they kind of get a sense of the facts and they know the weaknesses and they're very reasonable and it's going to be tough not to like capitulate. I always find those people, you have some people that are blinded, like this is it, this is all you're going to get, but.
And it's unreasonable. I mean, I've seen prosecutors hold the line on, silly little misdemeanors. And it's like, I think sometimes they're buying into that, I have to be so tough to be a prosecutor. But you're right. You just have to be reasonable. But I did try a lot of cases, and that's where I used what I called my secret weapon.
Which is?
Ultra prepared.
Oh, well, there's no defense to that.
No, there isn't. And I would fake people out, I think, at least in the beginning. They would think, this, demure, feminine prosecutor comes in and I'm going to beat up on her. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not a bulldog persona type, but I am double and triple prepared and I can beat up on you back that way.
That's hard to... It's easy to talk about. It's a lot harder to explain what you actually have to do to be, double and triple prepared. But, you really can't do it until you're looking at the file and, hey, did you do this? Did you do that? What about this? What about that? But I wanna back up because I know most of that. So and we're going to cover that. But so if you go 17 from 2004, now you're in 1987, right? Am I doing my math right?
Somewhat.
And
I know where you're headed. You're off a year.
Oh, I don't. I'm just because I don't. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Dearborn Heights. I was born in Dearborn, grew up in Dearborn Heights. And you mentioned my career before being a judge. I had a career before being a prosecutor too.
Yeah, well, we're going to get to that. But Dearborn, did you have brothers and sisters?
2 older brothers.
Because when you look on the internet, it's hard to find any of that. And
good.
and I didn't look at your social media footprint, but I don't think it's great. You're on there, I think, right?
Right.
You're more of an observer than a poster.
I'm much more of an observer than a poster. However, since my retirement, I did join Facebook.
Oh, good for you.
And I'm posting more on Facebook, which I like better than the other social media.
Am I a Facebook friend or not yet?
I don't think you requested it.
Uh-oh, well, we'll have to take care of that. So two older brothers,
Yes.
and you probably use that against them all the time. And what did your mom and dad do?
My mother was a homemaker, and my dad was an executive engineer at Ford Motor Company. Big surprise since
Right.
I was born in Dearborn.
Right. And so you didn't have a lot of connection to the law in your immediate family.
I did not ever meet a lawyer. I never knew a lawyer. There were no lawyers in my immediate family.
And most importantly, I assume you didn't need a lawyer,
I
right?
did not need a lawyer.
And so you go to undergrad where?
Well, I didn't go to undergrad out of high school.
Okay.
I did not follow a straight line to get where I'm at all.
Okay. Well, that's where we're going to get at. So you graduate from?
Fortson High School.
Okay.
I first went to Divine Child High School.
Yeah, there you go.
It was not a good fit for either of us.
Wow.
And we parted ways about 2 months into 10th grade.
Wow, you just became my hero. There's nothing like getting kicked out of high school.
Did I say kicked out?
No.
See, now this is what my husband told me not to talk about.
Uh-oh.
I was kicked out.
Oh, that's awesome. And I won't get into the details, but I think you say it with a smile, because I think people who are successful look at everything like that and somehow are able to look at it in a positive way, or somehow they got something out of it.
Absolutely.
And it inspired them to do something else. But eventually you graduate from high school and you don't go to college right away?
No. If I had stayed at Divine Child, maybe I would have been on a college track. But when I went to Fortson High School 2 months into 10th grade, that's a very blue-collar school, and no one ever mentioned anything to me about going to college. And that was not the focus of Fortson High School. It prepared students for being out in the working world. So,
which you could do in the 80s.
In the 70s.
70s, 80s. But anyway.
This was the early 70s.
Okay. So like my brothers.
Uh-huh.
And?
So I took things like typing, and this is a blast from the past, shorthand.
Right.
Bookkeeping, preparing me for being like a secretary somewhere, which is fine.
And you could make a living as a secretary back in the, I'll say, pre-Cooley days.
Absolutely.
Law firms really hired secretaries. They became part of the firm, and although not lawyers, they earned a good living and were able to, make a life out of it.
Well, I never dreamed of legal secretary until one day I signed up for a work-study program that they had at the school. This was the end of my junior year. And one night, my typing teacher called me at home, and he said, I have the best job, but none of the other girls' parents will let them take it because it's in downtown Detroit. And I said, my parents will let me take it. What is it? And he said, it's working for a law firm called Friedman, Myers & Keys, and you would be their runner.
Wow.
And I took it. The job was mine, and I worked full-time over that summer before my senior year. And then I did work-study my senior year, where I went to school in the morning. I took the Michigan Avenue bus downtown and worked for Freeman, Myers & Keys in the afternoon.
I was going to say, because of junior year, you would have just gotten your license, and, Dearborn is probably, I don't know what it was then, it's still a 30-minute drive, 30-minute drive maybe to downtown.
Oh, yeah. But I had a car. My dad bought me a little Pinto as soon as I started driving, and I had to pay him back every month. It was a whole $2,500 car, and so every month I made a small payment on it. But I would drive my car, my little Pinto, to a shopping center parking lot at Michigan and Greenfield and hop on the Michigan Avenue bus and go downtown and work.
Wow, what an experience.
It was a fantastic experience, one of the happiest times of my life.
Oh, man. And so you had the benefit of seeing Detroit in a different heyday.
This was in the time of Hudson's, Crowley's.
Right.
I would get my paycheck and go shopping on my lunch hour and spend it.
Tigers were down there in the line.
Tigers, yes.
And so how do you advance to college then? I mean, you have a pretty good job, right?
I do. Well, but, then high school ended, 1975, I graduated, And in the meantime, I had started doing a lot of things for the firm besides being a runner. I did typing. I knew shorthand. They were thrilled with that. I would take shorthand dictation.
Yeah, I know what that is.
Take down letters and type them. They did a lot of estate planning, and I would type wills. There were no word processors.
Right.
I would put in my original piece of paper and 3 carbon copies. And if you made a single error, you could not correct it. You had to rip it all out of your typewriter.
Right.
And start over again.
When we cared about your typing speed and how many errors you had, that was, probably even into the 80s, that was still a criteria for secretaries.
Well, I loved it. I loved everything about it. The minute I walked in the door of that law firm, I was in love with the law. And I loved the lawyers. There were 7 lawyers in this firm. They never hesitated to take the time to teach me things. They were busy people, and in my eyes, very important people. But they always took a moment to just teach me something. One day, they asked me to go to Lawyer's Title and pick up a title insurance policy. And it was a beautiful summer day. And this partner with the firm, as I was leaving, said, "You know what? I'll go with you. It's a nice day for a walk." And so I felt like $1 million. This firm partner's walking down, running an errand with me. And on the way there, he explained what title insurance was and why it was important and why people got it. And they just ignited my interest.
Wow. And so you go to school?
I graduate from high school, and they asked me to stay on as a full-time legal secretary, and I did. And then the firm merged with a big firm in Southfield, and they moved out to Southfield. And I stayed for a little while. But eventually I left, and I went around to a number of other firms, and I worked as a legal secretary full-time for about 7 years after high school.
Wow. And then you decide to go to college?
Well, as with everything, other people decided for me. So one day, and I remember the firm I was working for, I remember where I was standing, and I remember the attorney. He said to me, "You should go to law school." And I said, "Law school? I haven't even been to college." And he said, "You should go to college." And by that time, I was living alone, supporting myself. I said, "How would I ever go to college? I live alone, I support myself, and I can't go to school."
They probably made a good wage, but not a wage where you're saving, significant money.
Right. It was enough, for a young woman to live on in her 20s when, things cost a lot less.
Right.
Yeah.
You're driving your Pinto.
And I'm driving my Pinto. And he said, I said, "How would I do that?" And he goes, "Get a student loan." And I said, "What's a student loan?"
Yeah. In the 80s, though, I think Michigan State was $65 or $70 a credit hour. I think when I went there, it was in the 60s, and my sisters were a little ahead of me, but they were able to waitress and earn enough money to, pay, not necessarily support themselves, but pay for their term. Back then in the 80s, Michigan State was on term, so you could, 13 credits would be, $700 or $800. You could.
Yeah, it's doable.
It was doable. It wasn't necessarily. They didn't necessarily have a mortgage and a car payment and all that stuff.
Right.
They had support from my dad, but they, you could work and go to school, but it was, it's the kind of thing that would put a, crunch your budget for sure.
Well, my dad chipped in then. So, I went and told him I want to go to college, and I want to go to college so I can go to law school. And,
Wow.
He was born in 1920. So his idea was that I would marry a lawyer. And when I told him I want to be a lawyer, all credit to him. He was thrilled. It's like, I never thought of that. You could be a lawyer.
Right.
And he said,
it wasn't there were women lawyers back then,
sure.
but there weren't. You were still in a minority probably in the classroom.
Well, in my dad's generation, he was of the mindset that, you don't, that wasn't just something he thought of.
Exactly. And so where do you go to college?
U of M Dearborn.
Okay. And I assume you graduated and
I did it at lightning speed. Once I decided I want to go to law school and I have to go to college first, I did it at lightning speed. So I did quit working full-time, and I went to school full-time, maintained my apartment. I did a little like freelance word processing stuff in the evenings for some big law firms, but I got done in like 2.5 years. I went year-round, crammed in all the classes I could.
And the law firms that you worked at, none of them did criminal defense or ordinance enforcement or anything like that. So you had no experience with that side.
Correct.
What did you study in undergrad?
Well, that's what led me to law was, I knew I was going to go to law school, but I majored in philosophy.
Okay.
And it was in a philosophy class that one of my professors said, the choice of careers is an ethical decision. It was an ethics class. And I thought, well, that could be argued with. I'm not sure I agree with that, but okay. And at that point, it just dawned on me, I want to go into public service of some sort.
Wow. And looking back, that's exactly what you've done, right?
That's exactly what I did. 39 years in public service.
And so you matriculate, you graduate from U of M Dearborn and go to Wayne State.
I missed my law school commencement because my college commencement because I had already started at Wayne State Law School.
Well, good for you. I was not quite. I didn't miss my commencement because of, I think I was out all night Saturday night, and I remember walking home.
Yeah.
Thinking, my commencement is right now.
That came from me after my law school commencement.
But I went. I think the difference between graduation and law school was like 4 days. It was Labor Day weekend, so you were on a track to get done. You were driven. I mean, that's sort of been one of your things throughout your whole career, and it didn't just start when you got out of law school or when you took your job with the prosecutor. Or
sort of my personality.
Yeah. And so you go to Wayne State. Did you work at all?
Eventually. The first year I was just a full-time student, which was fantastic.
All in. All in.
Yeah. And then I got a job as an intern at it was called at the time, it no longer exists, it was called Senior Citizens Legal Aid Project. And that was another magical experience and just cemented my love of this whole idea of public service.
And so I assume they're doing estate planning documents and power of attorneys, or no?
No, they did not do much of that at all. They did. We did outreach, for one, where we would go to different senior citizen centers in Detroit, and the office was downtown, and then we would go to like the East Side neighborhood before it was leveled like it is now, and we would go to a community center or a senior center, and everyone who had an issue where they wanted to talk to a lawyer, every senior would come and stand in line.
Free legal.
It was wonderful. And they had
landlord tenants,
whole variety.
My neighbor's dog is barking.
Oh, absolutely. One of them was, I gave my couch cushions to a company to reupholster, and they've never returned them. And I loved it because we were so practical oriented, and I would go with another attorney. I wasn't an attorney yet, I was a law student, but I would go with a lawyer, and I remember this one in particular, and she said, well, we'll go get them for you. And we went to the upholstery place and got her couch cushions for her and brought them to her home and delivered them.
It is sort of like people can get stuck in a small issue, but they can be really bothered by it, and there's really no lawyer could really help them if it wasn't a special situation. So you feel like helpless, you
Absolutely.
know? And so when you can help out the helpless, there's a real, I don't know, reward for those who can do it.
It was very satisfying. Yes, I'm sure if a lady walked into your office and said, I need my couch cushions back, you would be empathetic. But as a lawyer,
in all likelihood, it'd be cheaper for us to write a check for the cushion.
Right.
Yeah.
I get it.
Here, can I just buy you some new cushion.
I get it. No, it was very satisfying. Or people would come to us. I remember one gentleman, he said, I got married years and years and years ago in Alabama. We separated. I came up here. We never divorced. I haven't seen her in 30, 40 years, and now I want to remarry. And so we had to unravel that whole thing. But we had a lot of things like that.
You know, that's a once in a lifetime kind of scenario.
Mm-hmm.
You learn a lot on maybe what is an interesting case, but you know, no matter what you go into, you got to sort of dig down deep to find everything. You know,
Definitely.
so that's an interesting experience. But then, you know, you graduate from law school. I assume you were always prepared, got called on in law school, and had read every case and probably didn't buy the outlines, did them all yourself, right?
Correct. Graduated cum laude.
Yeah, that's great. That's amazing. And then, you know, okay, you're a lawyer or studying for the bar. You still don't really know a lot of you know a few lawyers, but you don't have like a.
Oh, I knew a lot of lawyers. I felt out of place in law school because I had this long career of 7 years working for some of the biggest law firms in downtown Detroit and outward suburbs and et cetera. And I knew a lot of lawyers.
And one thing that is worth noting is that, so 7 years is 25. In the 70s, 25 was much different than 25 today. And, and so, you know, at Cooley, it's nothing for a 30-year-old or a 28-year-old or, you know, even most law schools around the state to decide they want to go to law school. But back then, you were probably by far, especially at Wayne State, the oldest.
I was a senior citizen at Wayne State Law School.
Right.
No, there were a few others even older than I was, but very few and far between.
It wasn't the traditional path. And Wayne State really wasn't that kind of law school.
Right.
In the sense of, you know, you worked and went to law school, or, you know, it's a supplement to your current employment or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
And so you knew a lot of lawyers because you had worked in the law and you had 7 years, and but then what is your plan?
Well, I had one well in advance of graduating. So
a job?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my last year of law school, at the very beginning of the year, the Michigan Court of Appeals, the director of the research division, came to the campus and interviewed people. And I was interviewed, and I was offered a job in the fall of my third year of law school to begin after I graduated.
And who was that? It wasn't Carl Gromek, was it?
No, actually, it was local attorney Jim Graves with Sinus Dramus. It was his father.
Oh, wow, that's great.
His father was the director of the research department, and he was a strict taskmaster. Jim will acknowledge that his father was that way. And he ran a tight ship, but he interviewed me and offered me the job.
And so when you're at the Court of Appeals, you're not working for a specific judge. You're sort of a general research division.
At first.
At first. And then if you shine, then you get picked up by a judge.
The chief judge, Bob Danhoff, selected me to be his law clerk.
Oh, well, there you go. Go right to the top.
Yeah.
But the thing that a lot of people don't understand is when you're working at the Court of Appeals, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost like getting a master's in the law, isn't it?
Yeah, that's why I wanted to go there first. I thought I didn't feel equipped, like a lot of law students don't feel equipped to set foot, take one step out of law school and then go practice law. Right. So I felt like I need a learning period, a study period where you're more involved in the reality of law rather than the esoteric,
It's still a little esoteric, but it's still a little reality. But it's really a wide breadth of different stuff, both procedural and constitutional and divorce and workers' comp, and you're digging down deep and trying to get the answer and correcting judges that may have made error, really trying to find the answer and being able to express it in a way that makes everybody look intelligent, right?
It's true. And you pick up a case that you're going to be working on for the next week to write a report to the judges. And one day it could be a highway defect case, and the next day it would be a homicide case.
Right. And you could be dealing with felony murder to, governmental immunity or
Absolutely.
something like that. Yeah, and you have to do it at a high level. And you're not just doing it for a client, you're doing it for a judge or, you're Mr. Graves, I guess. Somebody's going to look at that work and comment or say, great job, or, geez, oh, Pete, this is way off.
Oh, definitely. You would give feedback. Everyone knew who the good pre-hearing attorneys were. They called them pre-hearing attorneys back then. I think they're called something different now.
When I was at the Supreme Court, they called them commissioners, but
yes.
Commissioners, and we get green reports, I think, is what the CRs is what they call them, but they were on green paper. But that brings you to Lansing?
Yes, when I first accepted the job with the Court of Appeals, they said, and this was, in September, and it wasn't going to start until June, and they said, we don't have an opening in the Detroit office. The only thing we can offer you is a spot in the Lansing office. And I said, well, that sounds pretty good. And I had never set foot in Lansing in my life. And I started looking at street maps, trying to figure out where will I live.
Preparing.
You
wanted to have an answer for everything.
And then they called right at the end of the year in May, they called me back and they said, it turns out we do have an opening in the Detroit office. If you want to stay there, you can. And I said, I sort of like the idea of moving to Lansing. So no.
Wow, what a big decision that was.
It was a big decision when you think of, everything that came after.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it could have worked out better, but...
I think it did.
No, I don't know if it could have worked out any better.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Than the decision you make, but it definitely would have been a different career for certain, right?
Yeah, I felt a little beaten up in Detroit, I mean, it can be a little bit of a cruel place to deal with sometimes.
And tell me what year this is.
This would have been, I graduated law school in 86.
So and how long were you at the Court of Appeals?
2 years.
2 years, was that generally the term that you would work for them?
Yes, it was typically a year in pre-hearing and then a year as a law clerk. Judge Danoff only allowed his law clerks to stay a year.
And what was that like?
With Judge Danoff?
Yes.
It was interesting. He was a quiet guy, pretty much kept to himself in his office. And, we had some interactions, but it was more sort of just working on your own and then getting his guidance from time to time.
And also working with his secretaries and his staff and the interworkings of the Court of Appeals. And did you go to watch oral arguments?
Actually, I don't recall doing that. Maybe I did once when I was I think I did when I was a pre-hearing attorney.
And tell me where the Court of Appeals was. It on Washington and Michigan?
Michigan, yeah.
Yeah, in the brown building there.
Yeah, I don't know what that is now, but yeah, that's where it was back then.
And that's what I think Hugh Clark's office was in there for a while.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah, right across from. Yeah, I mean, I argued in that court a couple times, and fortunately, they're no longer there. I mean, I think that was a good move. But so 2 years goes by quick.
Yeah.
And you're not one to take a whatever they call that a year off.
Yeah,
you know. So I assume that you lined up a job before, knowing that your time to leave is coming. How did you do that?
Well, as my year with Judge Danoff was ending, I knew this whole time I wanted to be a prosecutor. And,
really?
Oh, yeah. And
when you say the whole time?
Well, basically when I sat in that philosophy class and decided that, I wanted to go into public service, it was be a prosecutor.
Public service could be a
lot
of different things, but that was even though you had never really been in a prosecutor's office and doesn't sound like your paths would have really crossed with any prosecutors.
No.
None of them were your mentor.
No. It's just, I don't know, I related to this idea of a crime victim being the underdog and sticking up for the underdog and going into court and fighting for a crime victim and delivering justice.
And so you enter the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office sort of...
Not easily.
Well,
Because
I would say maybe at the end of the heyday. Would that be sort of at the end of the heyday where you see all the people that we've known and so many people came out of the prosecutor's office?
if you're referring to the heyday as that time period where people went there and stayed a couple of years and then went on to be, pretty big names in the criminal defense area, yes, at the end of that heyday. I came along, though, when there were a lot more people starting as career prosecutors.
Right.
And that was much more the focus of that
and,
office.
and really what I mean is, there were a lot more characters back then.
There were.
And, Leo Farhat was still practicing, and he had been the Ingham County prosecutor for a period of time. And before Don Martin, was it Ray Scadeller?
Peter Houck,
Peter
wasn't
Houck,
it?
yes. So, and not that you obviously would have known Peter better than I would have been. He wasn't, I don't think he's considered a character, but there were a lot of people in the office
Yes.
that had a lot of, character, let's put it that way. Not in a bad way, but
Right.
just a fun place to be around, I think.
Definitely.
And even the practice with the judges was different,
Yes, it was.
especially with the City Hall and the mezzanine level
Right.
and the way that worked and sort of the Jack and Jill connection between the courtrooms,
Yeah.
the chambers.
The no security.
The
anyone
security.
could walk in.
No security, that's
I think I'll
true.
go back and see the judge.
Just buzz in.
Yeah.
So that would have been 87, which...
I started at 88.
88, and I started law school in 87, actually. I graduated in 87 from Michigan State and started a few days later. So I was behind you by a decent amount, but not terribly. And you get assigned to like a district court.
At first, yeah. I was assigned to
and
district.
tell me how many women were in the prosecutor's office at that time.
Oh, boy. I mean, there was a fair amount. Don Martin was the prosecutor who hired me.
Right.
And I always thought he was very pro-woman and, really tried to promote the women in the office as much as possible. But I'd say there were maybe 10,
10 out of maybe 30 or 20?
25, maybe.
25? Yeah. So, and you start out, it's really, I'm obviously don't know, but I mean, you're basically trying cases right away.
Pretty much.
Yeah. You're not groomed in an apprentice like you would
No.
be in a big firm and second chairing.
No,
and then
I remember my first day of work. I was scared to death because I was scared to go to court. I had never done this before, and I had no experience as a prosecutor. So I remember coming in, and I was standing at the coffee machine, and the victim witness coordinator was standing there, and she looked at me, and she said, "Oh, are you the new APA?" And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "Do you want to go to court today?" And APA just called in sick. And I about freaked out.
And would Judge Stella have been on the bench?
Yes.
So other than that, it was all men except for maybe Judge McCabe?
In district court, yeah.
Right.
In
right.
circuit, it was just Carolyn Stahl, and then in district, it was Pam McCabe, and I believe she was the only one.
Yeah, I don't think there was anybody in 54A,
No.
and certainly not in 54B. Of course, it was,
Dave Jordan, and
well, was it Shearhart before that?
not when I was a prosecutor.
Oh, well, you must one hell of a character then.
But I knew him very well.
So you start out in district court.
At 54A
And that's-
mostly.
Yeah, and that's good experience, isn't it?
Oh,
You're
yeah.
trying cases and picking juries and
And pleading things and dealing with fires and, being the traffic cop out in the hallway with all the people crammed in there.
right. And tell me, in 17 years, you rise up to be second in charge.
Yes.
Second in charge. Which tell me what that is. Chief deputy or
Chief assistant.
chief assistant. And are you still trying cases as chief assistant?
I think I only tried one. It was a high-profile case after I became chief assistant.
And I know you remember what it was.
Yeah, I do.
Tell me what that is.
It was a very well-publicized case. It was the shooting of the young, I believe she was a 10 or 11-year-old girl. She was sleeping in her bed at the Autumn Ridge, I think they're called, townhomes. And there were gang guys out in the parking lot, and they were sort of screwing around, and one of them fired like a AK-47 type assault rifle, and it went through the wall of her bedroom, and she was in bed, so it went basically the whole length of her body, the bullet did.
Terrible.
And it damaged almost everything you can think of in her body. She lived, but it was touch and go, and the whole community was on edge, pulling for her. She was in intensive care for a long, long time, hooked up to everything you can think of, and quite surprisingly, with I think she had a 20-30% chance of survival, and she pulled through.
Wow, that was you obviously remember it well.
Oh yeah.
So I know some things about you in your practice. You write down every closing argument. Is that true?
As a prosecutor, it is true.
Yes.
It is true.
Yeah.
I've always
and you
said
saved them?
I saved many of them, but not all of them.
Okay. And that was just your way of preparing?
I know that it's not everybody's way, but
Right.
I always tell people that your closing argument is a speech, basically. I mean, not speech in the sense that it's some boring, dry thing, but it is a speech. And the greatest speeches in the history of the world, like the Gettysburg Address, do you think Abraham Lincoln just winged it from, off the top of his head? No, he wrote it down. And, I did not read it, because you can write something down and you can say it word for word without reading it. You can still sound conversational.
Right.
But if I want to say that he thrust the knife in his back, I want to make sure that I remember that I want to use the word thrust. And I never trusted myself to just wing it and remember that I wanted to use such descriptive and powerful words. So I wrote the descriptive and powerful words down.
There is something about writing out the closing and your thoughts and how you want to put it together from a beginning to a middle to an end, even if you go off script.
I didn't, though, Andrew. Honestly,
no, I know. I'm just saying there is a process.
Word for word, write it down.
Right. But I'm saying there is a process that's very healthy in preparing and writing it out from, and reviewing it and editing it. It's a very, very productive process of, and even if in the moment when you get up there, which I often do, I'll go off script. And part of it is because I feel like because I've always done the defense side, it's always sometimes best to respond.
Oh, but that's because you're the defense side.
Right.
That makes total sense.
Right. So, there is that sort of, and I've written out closing arguments before, and I just can't let things go unresponded to. And then, once you get started, it's hard to go back to the script but the preparation side is for sure, something that is a great process to just and I'm certain that, once you've done 5 or 10 closing arguments, not that it's scripted, but you become really good at, writing them out and how you want to say certain things.
It always was very time consuming, but yeah, I did it right to the very end.
And you did it on your motions too, or no?
No, not emotions.
And what about openings?
Openings written out word for word.
And openings are, I always say, only important in the moment, but can be damning to you in the end, I think. I don't know. Often an opening, nobody remembers them, if unless it's a one-day trial. right? But
What's that?
yeah, exactly. But, you work so hard on the opening. I mean, it really, because it's the beginning of trial, you spend a lot of time on that opening. But sometimes if you're a 2-week trial, nobody even remembers what you said.
Well, I don't know. That may be true, but my philosophy has always been, and this is speaking from the prosecutor side of it, not the defense side of it.
A trial lawyer.
Advocacy for me always began in voir dire.
Right.
And if you're not doing advocacy in voir dire, there's something wrong. And then by the time I sit down after my opening statement, I wanted the jury to breathe this big sigh of relief and think, oh, I thought this was going to be hard, but I'm going to convict them. Now, you want them to follow the law, and be true to their oath. But you're an advocate.
Right. Right.
I want them to be convinced after I sit down with my opening statement, rather.
So tell me what you think was, maybe your biggest case as a prosecutor, or one of your biggest cases.
People ask me all the time, what's your most memorable case? And just same thing as a judge. It's like, I don't have memorable cases because I just have people I remember. It's the people I remember. Right. And I can't pick just one person that I remember more than the others. I did some very high-profile cases. The homicide of Bob Gross, who was the Lansing State Journal sports writer, that was very, very high profile.
And that was when, the State Journal was meaningful.
It was meaningful.
I mean, and I don't say that. That's when we actually had real reporters and people used to write for the State Journal.
Yes.
And they were long-time employees, and Bob Gross was well known, and
very loved. And as I recall, he very much focused on high school sports, and he didn't give them short shrift, and people really appreciated that.
And that was a case did that go unsolved for a little period of time, or
No.
did they know right away?
They knew right away.
Uh-huh. And so you think those are the easiest cases. Did it involve circumstantial evidence like DNA?
Yes.
And how did you handle that?
Well, I was very new to DNA. It was the first DNA case I ever did. And actually...
And what year would have that been? Was it pre-95 or...
It was whatever year that Don Martin lost the election.
Oh, that was 96.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it was it was around about there.
So November of 96 was the election year.
Okay.
And then obviously the changeover was 97.
So sometime in earlier 96, the case was on Judge Harrison's docket, and I was assigned to Judge Harrison's docket, and someone else was handling the case. And I went to this someone else, and I said, I would love to try that case. Can I take it and work on it? And this someone else said to me, you would never understand it. It's got DNA and hundreds of witnesses.
Good for them. That was like the kiss of death for them.
Absolutely. Well, then Don Martin loses the election, and this someone else, it was not Don, came back to me knowing that he wasn't going to be in the office anymore. With the file in his hand, very sheepishly hands it over to me. And so it became my case that way.
So you would have tried it in 97?
It must have been 97, or it could have been 98. I don't know.
Oh, okay. And
we did the first thing I noticed was that there was an error in charging it. So I did a brief remand to district court and fixed the error. So it did take a little while to get to trial.
Okay. And what were the DNA issues, if you remember?
Well, the DNA there was just in the defendant's ear, there was a little drop of blood, and a very observant Lansing police officer saw it, and it got swabbed and sent for DNA. DNA, it wasn't like that was in many cases, even in that year. It was still being...
So I think the O.J. Simpson case was in the mid-90s.
That sounds about right.
96.
Yeah.
And so, as much as DNA and fingerprints were, a big deal and they were just coming on, I mean, it was really the O.J. Simpson case that, for most jurors, put it on the forefront, right?
Most people, yeah.
Most people. And that's when we saw the onslaught of Forensic Files and Dateline and every other show. And so, you're right on the cusp if you try the case in 98 on
So-
the DNA issues,
I thought I have to learn everything there is to know about DNA.
which is the only way to do it.
Well, yes,
Isn't it?
but science was never my forte, and I'm not conceding that I wasn't smart enough to do the case because it had DNA.
Right.
But it was like a tripping point for me. So the more I read about DNA, the more in depth I got, and I'm like, I can't retain this. I'm not going to be able to do this. So we used a lab in North Carolina, and I remember, I worked and prepared and everything, but I had to go pick up the lab scientist from the airport the night before her testimony, and I picked her up and took her to her hotel, and I said, I'm freaking out. I don't know how to ask you anything about DNA. I've read every
You
book
said
on it.
that?
Yeah. I almost went too in depth with it, so it was
Right,
beyond understanding.
Probably could have used a phone call to your expert before.
Well, I did, but it's like, okay, I still don't know what I'm doing.
Your nerves are always the highest when you have to perform, I think, right?
Right.
And if you're really prepared, you also know what you don't know, and you become like consumed by, oh my God, they're going to do this or that, and I'm not going to. You know all the holes.
Well, I had tricked myself partly because of my own personality into thinking that I had to understand every nuance of DNA.
Right.
And in reality, what the expert said to me was, relax, just keep it simple. She said, here's 8 questions. Ask me these 8 questions.
Isn't that a great expert?
Oh, yes.
Isn't that a great expert?
Yes.
That's,
and you know what? I did exactly what she told me to. And I asked her the 8 questions. And she made it understandable. It wasn't like the picayune stuff that I
Right,
was reading.
right.
She made it understandable.
But ultimately, and of course, you probably don't have somebody in the office who can say, "Here's the foundation. Here's what you need to do. Here's blah blah blah. Here's a foundation that I've laid. Just read this." I mean, you're.
I don't remember that.
Right.
We did work together a lot. We didn't
Right.
try cases together. I never tried a case with another APA, but we did, work together as far as, let me teach you this and that.
But it was one of the first DNA cases. I mean, you're sort of, trailblazing here, and it's always
Freaking out is what I was
great
doing.
to work with an expert who can sort of, here, ask me these questions.
Yeah. She saved the day. So she went on autopilot once I asked her the questions. And
Who you remember who the defense lawyer was?
yes, Kerry Cole.
Oh yeah, he's a well-respected lawyer. He worked with Frank, and I assume you're smiling a little bit. I assume you got a one-word verdict.
Oh, yes.
Did you ever lose a case?
Oh, yeah. I lost lots of cases because I tried cases. I did not chicken out. And sometimes you have to try cases. I had a guy on YTA, Homes Youthful Trainee, probation in Clinton County, and he did some stupid felony. I mean, it was really, I don't want to say minor. It was a felony, but
Right.
I would have pled it to a misdemeanor.
Relative to some of your other cases. And you can always look at a case and say there's a lot of mitigating facts here.
Absolutely. He wouldn't take any plea at offer at all, not at all, because anything he took would violate his YTA status in Clinton County, and he was scared to death of that. He was on
Back in the day.
It was a sexual assault.
Martleau and Tavonen, probably.
Right. It was a sexual assault that he was on probation for.
Oh, right.
So mine was he threw a brick at some guy's head over a fight over a girl. And, I tried that case. But I know prosecutors now who, maybe would have folded. But, you got to do what you got to do. I'll make every reasonable offer. I'll, do whatever I can. Tell me what your sticking point is, and I'll see if I can fix it so we can get to a resolution. But when you can't do any of that, you don't just fold. You try the case.
Sometimes you got to try, and sometimes it, maybe even if the outcome is, known by everybody.
Right. Well, that one wasn't. He got convicted. However, I did lose cases, and that's because I tried so many cases, and I didn't just, fold if it couldn't be resolved.
And so you decide at some point, the timing was probably good, you're going to leave the prosecutor's office and run for the bench?
Well, it was just like that, going to law school thing. It came to me. I didn't go to it.
Oh, really?
So one day I came in, I was the chief assistant, and I came into work and I saw on my calendar it said lunch with, and it named off 3 people. And
Somebody at the sinus firm?
no,
Okay.
no, it was a local attorney who dabbles in local politics.
Okay.
And it was Stuart Dunnings, my boss, and it was his campaign manager who had helped him defeat Don Martin.
Okay.
And so I thought, well, what is this? So I went to lunch with them. We went to the U Club back when it was downtown Detroit or downtown Lansing, and I remember
Right.
sitting there, and all of a sudden they started asking me these questions like, do you own your house? How much do you owe on it? What is your mortgage? How much do you have in savings? All these questions. And I'm like, what are you asking me about this for? And one of them turns to Stuart and says, I thought you primed the pump. And Stuart goes, you're going to run for circuit judge.
You ran against Brian Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Brian had a great name,
Yes.
and you won easily, I think.
Easily. There were 6 of us actually in the race initially. But yeah, he made it. Brian made it through.
Brian was a really good guy.
He was a very good guy.
Yeah, and really prominent lawyer
Yes.
family, and Michael E. Kavanaugh has probably as good a reputation as
Yes.
anybody in this
Oh, yeah,
community.
it's hard to top it.
Yeah, and you sort of set the stage. Maybe, I'm not sure whether you were a little ahead of your time, but were you sort of the first person that kind of won a contested election as a woman
Oh, I don't think so.
for the bench, circuit court bench?
Didn't Paula Manderfield have a contested election?
She probably did, but did she run?
She
Was
ran
she on the bench before you?
district, yes, but she was a district
Yes.
judge,
Right.
so I think she ran a contested election to get to circuit.
Oh, probably. I think did she run for Stell seat? I think she ran for Stell seat.
I don't remember.
Yeah. And whose seat did you run for? Do you remember?
Tom Brown.
Oh, okay.
He was aged out. He was
Yeah.
age limited, so
Good
he
for-
couldn't run again.
That's great.
That's why it drew 6 people.
No, I'm
That's why
kidding.
it drew 6
because
people because it was an open
There was
seat.
no incumbent.
Yeah.
No, Tom Brown was one of the characters.
He was a character. He was.
The answer is no. If you didn't have a good and a bad experience with Tom Brown, you didn't practice. And we all have
that's a
our
good one.
share of good and bad experiences, and you just learn not to take it, make it personal, I guess.
Right.
But and so what did you decide? I don't want to be in the courtroom. I want to be on the bench. Or was it just I got to do this thing
These
because
people
all
came
these,
and told me to. No, I practiced in front of some really good judges. Maybe you didn't like them personally, but they were good judges who were prepared and knew what they were talking about. And one of them was Carolyn Stell. And maybe you didn't like the way she always treated people, but you couldn't deny that her intellect and her being prepared, etc. And I always thought in the back of my head, I could do that. I'd like to do that. But I never ran for anything in my life. I didn't think I could run for anything, so I never even brought it up to anyone. And then,
Geez, Pete, you had a name of Draganchuk.
well, I was told that Draganchuk could never beat a Kavanaugh.
Well, that's probably, good advice at the time.
No,
until they actually met you.
No, this was after they met me.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was the MEA told me that.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, and Judge Stell had a incredible reputation, and I'll tell you, she always treated me okay, but never felt good in her courtroom.
Yeah.
I never felt comfortable. And
I understand.
You know what? I don't. I hold judges sort of accountable, and as much as she is respected, I'm glad you're not like her.
I didn't intend to fashion myself after her in every way, but she was sort of my inspiration point where I looked at her and thought, I can do this and maybe even do it better, but I can do this. And so, but I had never raised it with anyone. It's like, this seemed impossible to me. And then this lunch, and they said, well, once they said to me, well, you're going to run for circuit judge. I'm like, I am? Well, that's actually not a bad idea. I said, I don't know how to run, though. And they said, you don't have to. Just do what we tell you. Just do what we tell you, and we'll show you how to do it. And then they said, go home and ask your husband. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have to go home and have this big discussion with my husband. It's going to cost money and time and everything. Right. I go home and I said, John, some people think I should run for circuit judge. Do you think I should? And he said, yes. Okay, end of discussion. I'm running.
Is that the only time you've ever asked him anything?
Pretty much. Yeah, you know me. I'm not prone to ask permission.
And so you run and you win, right?
Yeah.
And I would say the rest is history, but it's not history because were your parents still alive?
My dad was deceased.
Oh, well, your mom had to be happy when she got to see you. I mean, it's like a big honor, right? You get sworn in. It's a big deal. Now all your peers have to call you judge and everybody but that doesn't mean you're going to like the job, right? It's not a job you had done. It's not like you working in the prosecutor's office and you become a prosecutor. You're now a judge. And, did you have second thoughts?
Oh, no. I never had second thoughts. No, I had tough moments. I struggled, not with criminal. I did a criminal trial. I think my second week on the bench, I started doing criminal trials.
Right.
I had to leave for my investiture. I left in the middle of a criminal trial, went and had my investiture, and then came back, finished the trial. But it was
the
civil.
investitures are a little different today than they probably were for yours, but yours was probably
mine was a big to-do.
There you go.
I never had a wedding reception, so I wanted the chocolate fountain and the whole thing.
Exactly.
And I got it.
And so, tell me what your takeaway is for 20 years on the bench.
My takeaway.
Tell me what, the fact is that despite a storied career as a prosecutor, really, you're going to be known as a judge, right?
Right.
And a lot of cases. A lot of big cases.
A lot
of small cases that, were meaningful to people.
Yes.
You're calling balls and strikes all the time. Always prepared, right?
Always.
Still writing out your opinions.
100%.
Right?
I didn't write them. I ruled from the bench, and I would write them in advance.
Right.
I did not take them under advisement
you would
and then
read them, right?
Oh, read in quotation marks,
yes.
Keep it conversational.
And did you ever get swayed in your...
Yes.
Even though you've already written out the opinion?
Oh, yes. That's when I would sound very inarticulate because I would cross out everything I wrote, and it's like, oh, darn it, that attorney just convinced me I was wrong.
But I don't think that ever happened to me.
No, it didn't, Andrew. No. I'm sure it did. I don't remember.
I remember every single one.
I'm sure you do.
You're not going to believe this.
What?
We've covered an hour already.
Have we really?
Yes.
Time flies.
We're going to have you back.
Oh, I'd love to.
We have 1 hour, right? So, this is like talking to Mike Nichols. This was great. We're just getting into the good stuff.
Mm-hmm. No, you skipped the really good stuff.
Well, I'm coming back. Anyway.
We'd have to start at the beginning. And
well, we're going to cover the high school thing.
I know you are at some point.
I'm going to call John. But let me just ask you this. You decide you're going to retire, right?
Yes.
And 20 years is plenty long enough.
I think so.
And 20 plus 17 or 16 or whatever is public service. And I keep asking you, now what are you going to do?
Nothing.
Why?
Because, for one thing, I'm 68 years old.
Young.
Now,
68 years young.
I know.
In good health.
But I had a very grueling, very difficult career, honestly. I feel like And I don't mean to sound like I didn't love what I did. I loved it. But it took a lot out of me. And I gave up a lot in my life to be a judge. I gave up a lot. Like, I used to love to read. I was a voracious reader. And then I had to read briefs all the time. And I'd come home from work and I'd have such reading fatigue. The last thing in the whole world I wanted to do was to read for pleasure.
Just zone out and watch TV or something.
Zone out and watch TV, something completely mindless.
Yeah.
I would say to my husband, don't, this sounds awful. I'd come home and say, don't talk to me. I talked all day long making rulings, and I listened to attorneys argue and yell at me all day long, and I don't want any interaction. And, he's been retired for years, and he would say, well, when am I going to see you, God. And it's like you give those things up, and now I want them back.
Well, you're entitled.
I think so.
And you get to control your own career or path, right?
Yes.
And that's one of the great things about what you've done, right? As much as you've been influenced by everybody else, you've had the ability to take that influence and do what you wanted to do.
I never felt when I had my investiture that, someone put a crown on my head and now I was worthy of all this adoration or anything. I always felt I had to earn it. And I did because, I still had for years in the beginning, I had attorneys who were like, you don't know anything about civil law. My case is
I never said that.
No, you didn't. But there were plenty that acted that way.
There were days when I thought you thought I said that.
No, I don't recall that at all. I had to earn it through hard work, and be prepared and show that I could do this. And then, after the 20 years, I built that reputation. And now I feel like people say to me, a few will say to me, well, you're not the big shot anymore. You're not the judge. And it's like, I don't care. I built a wonderful reputation. I'm very, very proud of it. It took a lot of hard work, and that's still me. I earned it, and I still have it.
Yeah, well, it's not easy to do, to go, effectively scandal-free, never in the paper for anything other than, your decisions that you made, and to be able to retire on your own terms, in good health, with a sound mind, married, and able to, to me, I would never want to be a judge because, are your friends real or are they fake?
That's very difficult. That's a very difficult part of being a judge. And that was a bit of a fear for me. I knew who I was retiring, and I knew that I wasn't losing all this respect, that I had built it and earned it. But I did feel like, will certain people still be my friends?
Yeah, I'm just friends with John.
I was mostly concerned about you,
Andrew.
Yeah,
that's good. Well, this is great. I'm sorry we have to end. What I feel like right in the middle, that was like the quickest hour we've had.
It was fun.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for coming on.
You're welcome.